Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We are going to be talking about today how you can remove performance barriers for your clinicians to ultimately improve patient care. By way of introduction, my name is Stacy Leidwinger, and I'm on the marketing team here at Goliath Technologies. I also have with me Yemi Ladyju, who's our senior technical consultant, and is actually going to be giving you a preview into our software and how many health systems use that software to overcome those barriers today. Now, before we jump in, I wanted to do a few housekeeping items. One, we're just going to give a really brief introduction talking about many of the challenges we see out there in health IT, why these challenges manifest themselves, and then when you're looking to solve these challenges, what are some of the critical solution criteria that you need to evaluate? If you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. We'll get to them either throughout or at the end, so please don't hesitate to submit some questions. And one of the questions we always get is, can we have a copy of this recording? So within 24 hours, you will have a copy of this recording for yourself or to share with your peers. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. One of the things that we hear throughout working with health systems and health IT is one of the largest challenges that many face is that they have half the budget and half the resources to accomplish the same tasks as their enterprise counterparts, specifically when it comes to managing their virtualized desktop and application environment, whether it be Citrix, VMware Horizon, and how to actually ensure seamless access to the EHR applications and ensure that they're high performing, all with less resources. The other thing we hear is when systems are slow or when clinicians can't log in, it has a direct correlation and a direct impact to the quality of patient care. And with the surge of remote working and the surge of telehealth, this is only being magnified by more and more end users, whether it be clinicians or back office working from home. And so now with less resources, more demand, many of you in health IT are facing these challenges and not only facing them in order to deliver quality care, but you're also working with a large gamut of technologies. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But it's not just about managing your Citrix environment or your Cerner environment. It's about optimizing how 20+ technologies can come together to ensure that your staff can have fast and seamless access to their EHR applications. And it's because of these challenges that Goliath is a standard in health IT. We have embedded intelligence and automation that our customers tell us enables them to actually add what would be equivalent of 3 headcount to supporting their Citrix and VMware and EHR application environment. We enable health IT to become proactive so you can address performance issues before your clinicians and staff are ever impacted. And we do that because we've got very specific purpose-built modules for all the major EHR systems from Epic, Cerner, Allscripts, Meditech, and can really provide end-to-end visibility across your entire delivery infrastructure, whether it be Citrix or VMware Horizon, understand the user behavior and how that impacts performance, and then finally, through the logon and use of your EHR applications. And so what we hear with many in healthcare is one of the challenges they find is because so much of this technology needs to come together, there can often be a lot of finger pointing when issues arise. Let's say someone goes ahead and says, Epic is slow today. Is it the application? Is it the VDI infrastructure like Citrix that's serving up Epic? Is it the network? Is it the storage? There's so many of these that there's a lot of cross-functional challenges across IT teams to really understand and isolate where the root cause is based on the end user complaint. And the reason there's a lot of this finger pointing that happens is there's simply not visibility. There's no way with objective evidence to isolate root cause and go to the right department in order to solve that issue. This all leads to poor communication. Missing data leads to gaps in analysis. And the other big piece of this is you really then are reliant on end user feedback. And the challenge, especially in healthcare, is that feedback can be really subjective. By the time a doctor or clinician gets around to even file a ticket that their system is slow, they've already seen 6 additional patients, have moved around the hospital, and they don't actually remember that point in time when it was slow, when it wasn't working, when they couldn't connect their third-party USB peripheral device, all the things that you really need to understand in order to isolate the issue and solve quickly. And as I said, a lot of reasons these challenges exist, and many of you know this on the phone, but what we find is it's often hard to explain why it's not easy to solve end user issues, especially when you're talking about remote users, because you have to bring those 15 to 20 technologies together. So first you look at the user themselves. They might be on location at one of your health systems. They might be working remotely, delivering telehealth these days. So each user has their own environmental factors. They have their different devices that they're using, and devices are having even greater impact as more and more people are using their own devices in BYOD scenarios. Then you have their connection point, and sometimes they are going through your network at the health system. Sometimes they might be going through their home Wi-Fi internet. Sometimes they might be leveraging a hotspot or are remotely working in other areas. Then from there, you have your entire delivery infrastructure. So you have Citrix, for example, and you're going to have your NetScaler. You're going to have all the elements that deliver NetScaler and Citrix environment for you, your broker services. You're going to have the EHR applications themselves. You're also underneath that layer going to have all of your back-end systems, whether it be SQL Server, Active Directory. Below that, then you have your hypervisor host. So when you look at this, you've got a lot of pieces that all have to come together, work in concert to deliver that seamless end user experience. So when there is an issue, let's say in Active Directory, it becomes really hard to understand that whenever your clinician calls in and says, Cerner is slow, it has nothing to do with Cerner. It has nothing to do with Citrix, but it does have something to do with a corrupt profile setting within their group policy. And it's needing visibility across all of this is what brings about so many challenges in your environment today. On top of that, I already talked about how in health IT you have less resources. Well, the other global activity that's occurring is there's simply not enough experts out there, whether it's Citrix or VMware. Here's just some simple math. If you think about it, for example, Citrix has 400,000 customers. On average, we say you probably need about 2 to 3 Citrix experts to run your environment effectively. Of course, that's differential based on size. So from that, there's a demand globally for about 1.2 million experts. Well, then you look at the supply. At the highest level of certified technical professionals, there's only 62. At most, there's another 150 of the next layer of certifications. And then there's another layer with around 50,000 users, Yemi's one of them, that has various levels of certification. So at most, you're talking about having 50 to 60,000 Citrix experts out there. So if you're one of these experts on the phone today, this is great for you. You're in high demand, even more so with the surge of remote working. But it does make it really challenging for organizations when they have this complex infrastructure that all needs to come together and you don't have enough resources. And if you're lucky enough to have enough resources, or yourself, you probably spend what we hear 25 to 30% of your time troubleshooting basic issues. Because the minute someone calls into your help desk and says, I have an issue with Citrix, 9 out of 10 times the help desk is going to immediately send it over to you. So your job as an expert is to ensure systems are up and running, they're high performing, you're constantly upgrading, but yet you spend most of your time troubleshooting basic end user issues. And it's because of all of this then, the challenges around the infrastructure, around the lack of expertise, less resources than are needed, that it really drives the need to have a single view that can deliver you data across all elements of the end user experience, all elements of your delivery infrastructure, and your EHR applications. So bringing that data together so that you can anticipate, troubleshoot, and document end user experience issues, and ultimately proactively address issues before end users are even impacted. And this is exactly what Goliath does. Now, we do this across industries. We do this specifically for some different healthcare, as well as law firms, as well as financial services, manufacturing. But we do have a stronghold in healthcare, as I said. We are a standard in health IT. And the reason for that is because of that purpose-built modules for your major EHR systems. And we of how your VDI interacts with those systems, whether they are on-prem or in the cloud. Again, when our health IT systems hire us and work with Goliath, they tell us it's 3 troubleshooting experts that are available 24/7, 365 days a week, and they take no lunch breaks. So when you think about then what you need to look at in terms of criteria when you're looking for a solution to help you solve all those problems I talked about, we tend to put it in 3 buckets and really kind of guide our customers when they look at solutions to think about, how is that solution going to help you anticipate issues? Does it offer things like threshold-based alerting? Can you test from remote sites that your applications are available? Are you going to be able to do capacity planning? When it comes to troubleshooting, are you getting real-time information that's correlating data from the end user experience, from the connection point, from their devices, from the network itself, from the servers, storage, all printers, all those things that need to come together? Can you provide a single view into all of that so you can isolate root cause of performance issues quickly? And can you provide instructions on how to resolve those issues? And then finally, all the answers, especially to transform from reactive to proactive, is found in the data. And do you have a solution that's going to allow you to share that data, integrate it with third-party tools, whether it be a ServiceNow or a Splunk, and then enhance it with out-of-the-box reports that are going to allow you to synthesize information looking at 90 to 180 days so that you ensure that you're meeting your performance requirements, that you're seeing trends over time where you might start seeing performance degrade because of, let's say, your hypervisor host, and it might be time to go ahead and invest in a new hypervisor. This is the stuff that you need to think about in order to evaluate solutions. And we're going to talk to you today about how health systems are using this criteria and putting into practice and getting immediate results for them. And so in order to do that, we're really going to go through 3 scenarios, and I'm going to turn it over to Yemi here very shortly to actually show you how organizations are doing it today. So first, one of the top complaints that we often hear in health systems is log-on times are too long, whether it be Citrix or the EHR environment. We're going to talk about how health systems have overcome those issues. We're going to talk about how to avoid and prevent application downtime so that you don't have any of your clinical apps going down at any point in time throughout your environment. And finally, we're going to talk about how you measure that clinician experience. How can you talk to your manager? How can your manager talk to the clinicians or the clinician liaison, making commitments that you're going to hit specific log-on times, specific performance metrics, and prove that you're hitting those metrics over time. So with that, let's dive into the first user story. So the first user story here is a Midwest health system. They use Epic Hyperspace, and they came to us because their clinicians were complaining all too often log-on times were over 2 minutes. They were saying Epic is too slow. It's impacting quality of care. And with the IT team, there was constant finger pointing. The application team managing Epic said it's not us. It has to be our VDI environment, which was managed through Citrix. The Citrix team was saying it's not us. Everything looks good on our end. And so there was a lot of this, how do we really solve this problem? Because it's having huge negative impact. So they found multiple ways to reduce their log-on time, but one of the ways that they had no visibility and was having impact across many of their users was a problem within their group policy. There was a registry setting that they discovered that was mapping to a decommissioned drive, and it was in random profiles. There was no reason it was in certain profiles. So when they were looking for patterns of slowness, they couldn't identify because it was happening with some of their back office staff, some of their nursing staff, some of their clinician staff. It was happening at different locations. It was happening at different times of the day. There was no pattern. And it was only in the data that they were able to solve it and understand that it was a policy setting that had been put into these user profiles. So with that, Yemi, why don't you go into the technology and show everyone today how they were able to go ahead and discover this so that they could resolve this issue once and for all.
Sounds good. So if we put ourselves in the shoes of, let's say you're of this customer, they're a large Epic health system, and they are getting complaints about really poor log-on time in the environment. And again, it's sort of random but persistent, which really means that you don't have enough data to come up with an answer as to why this information or why these issues are taking place. So in that case, customers would then, or this case, this particular health system, they would take a look at this view in the technology. This is the Citrix virtual apps and desktop session display. And what this will do is it will populate with all of the Epic sessions in the environment, where you can see the users, the server name, so on and so forth, the application name, down to some high-level sort of user experience metrics here on this view. A couple of things to point out is that the technology is filled with embedded intelligence and automation, which drives a lot of the things that happen, right? Getting you into a proactive state. So for the most part, a lot of our customers get to this page when they've gotten alerts from a particular, from the technology saying that a particular user has experienced some sort of issue in their session, whether it's a long logon time or sustained latency, or some sort of application issue. And we'll talk about that in some of the other client stories. But from here, let's say you've gotten an alert, issues with logon times, customers can then filter out and pull in sessions for the time period from the designated to the desired time period. So for instance, here I'm looking at sessions for the last 2 days, but I can go back weeks, months, if I would like to. We don't average or roll up any information we collect in the technology. So this particular health system kept data for about 90 days, but you can go even longer than that without losing any granularity in the data. So if people forget to respond or forget to put in tickets, or they complain about an issue a week later or something like that, you still have the objective data to drill into that. But sticking with the logon time story here, let's actually isolate a session the same way this health system would. Once you click on a session in technology, you get a pop-up of about 7 or 8 tabs. It really gives you the ability to efficiently troubleshoot any issue that comes up inside of this user session. These 8 tabs here break down everything that went into the user session, starting off with a high-level summary or a breakdown of each of these different tabs here. But then these tabs go into the logon process, the connection, the server, the hypervisor host, the processes and applications running, even down to the event logs, and we'll talk about why that's important. But in this case, we actually had, this particular health system, they're really interested in drilling into this user's logon to figure out why they're having these problems. So if you look here on the logon tab, you can see that this page is broken down into 2 sections. The top section is going to break down what's happening during brokering, specifically at the delivery controller and also at Citrix receiver or the workspace app. And you can see here at the delivery controller, seeing things like drive map, printer mapping, profile load times, session creation time, overall from a brokering perspective. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can actually see what's happening at the sort of client endpoint machine. And this is without deploying any technology to the laptops or tablets that the users are leveraging to access the environment. You're able to see things like ICA file download, or how long it took to establish a micro VPN connection, what sort of low-level receiver startup metrics or timings are affecting this particular user session. And then here, in the bottom section, you're able to break down and see everything that's happening at the session host. So here, depending on what's actually configured, these tabs expand, so I can expand authentication. I can now see what OUs this user was a part of and what domain controller was in charge of authenticating the session, and even see how long it took for those LDAP calls to take place, particularly when it comes to authenticating this user session. And here in group policies, this is where this health system actually focused. They're able to see each individual group policy that affected this session, down to the policy name and how long each one is taking. So effectively, in a couple of clicks, they're able to find a user, go over to their logon, expand the group policy section where they found a specific drive mapping policy that was mapping to a drive that was decommissioned. So which means is what that meant is that for every user that this policy applied to, there was a 2 or 3 minute timeout that was taking place because it couldn't find that drive, adding enormous time to the logon process. And they were able to identify that, remove that policy from the environment, and they were able to cut down the logon time significantly. Now, of course, in this environment, this is not an epic environment, of course, but I actually have a screenshot from this customer that really gives you an understanding of how helpful this was to them and how they were able to use this information to quickly solve those problems. So if you look here on the screen, they sort of went through the same process that I went through. Here you can see a logon time of over 280 seconds. Drilling further in the brokering stages, you can see that that's mostly into the profile load. And on further investigation, which was pretty much just clicking to open up the group policy section, they found that drive mapping policy that was taking up that much time. So really quick and easy to solve that, just removing the policy, and they're able to cut down the logon time significantly in a very short period of time. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy, and we can talk about the next client story.
Thank you, Yemi. Our next client story is with Universal Health Services, and they came to us. There were several different challenges they were having, but one of them was really focused around how to prevent application outages. And so what happened is there were points in times, whether it be Dragon Dictation or Cerner itself or others, where the application would not be available when it was needed by clinicians and staff. And so what they were doing is they were actually sending, they have locations across 20 plus some states, and they were sending administrators out to these systems early in the morning, around 4:30, 5 a.m., and logging on as if they were a user and launching their applications. As you can imagine, this was very manual. It was still fraught with errors, and healthcare never shuts down. As you're well aware, you've got your users working 24/7. So even going in at 5 in the morning, yes, they were catching some issues, but they weren't catching all of them. And so they turned to Goliath so that we could provide application availability testing and ensure applications were always available. And if they were not available or they were slow, it would alert them that there was an issue at that location before end users were even impacted. In addition to that, they had some other challenges around slow performance and disconnects, and they were able to use many of the metrics, some that you just saw from Yemi, others that were looking at things like ICA round trip for Citrix, to really isolate root cause and understand why sessions were slow or why Dragon Dictation was crashing. And so they were able, again, to use that data, pinpoint root cause, resolve quickly, and then based on the documentation, go ahead and add these alerts to prevent these issues from impacting end users ever again. And this is truly how they took their health IT solution and turned it from very reactive based on end user tickets and complaints to proactive, being able to address issues before anyone was impacted. Yemi, do you want to talk through the technology?
Absolutely. Yeah, and we can start off talking about how they were able to deploy the early warning system, or the alerting system that was able to get ahead of issues that could impact the availability and the ability of users to access the environment. So before we get into the technology, I want to sort of set the stage a little bit. And here is sort of the UHS deployment architecture of the Goliath solution. They have Cerner RHO, which is a completely remote hosted solution for their EHR application. So Goliath actually is the only technology that is deployed in Cerner RHO to be able to get that end-to-end visibility. So they have their the technology in Cerner RHO. There is a support center that is typically deployed on premises in the UHS data center. And then from their different remote locations, there are application launching technologies. So at UHS, for instance, they have about 33 acute care hospital locations that they're launching these applications from 24/7, 365 to make sure that these applications are available. And if they aren't, they get an early warning system, an alert to get them ahead of those and sort of potentially solve them or escalate to the proper channels and prevent or reduce the end user impact altogether. So to give you some perspective as to what's actually taking place, from these different application launch locations, I have a quick video here to show this technology actually launching a Cerner session. So from one of those locations, it could be, the technology is typically deployed on a laptop or a virtual machine. What it will do is it can open up a web browser to NetScaler or storefront page, sign in the same way an end user would. It's able to accept any security statements if needed. Confirm that the storefront page loads. It can navigate the storefront page based on what the configuration is, and then starts launching these applications. So here you can see it launches FirstNet, make sure that that application works, and then moves on to PowerChart or any other application that you would like to be launched within the Cerner Millennium Suite. And if there is an issue with any step of that process, IT gets a real-time alert, and they're able to head over to this portion of the technology here, which is the application availability analysis tab, to drill into specifically what's causing that alert. Now, this page that we're looking at is sort of your central management and configuration console for all of the launches taking place across the different locations. And you can see that this page is broken down into two sections. The top section is a sort of high-level dashboard of all of the launches taking place across the environment, with the blue bars representing the launch times, and the trend line here is the overall availability. So out of 100%, how available are the launches taking place across the environment? And you can filter, of course, based on date range. You can filter based on the locations that you're launching these applications from. You can also filter based on the applications that you're launching themselves. So whether it's FirstNet, PowerChart, SurgeonNet, so on and so forth. Now, the bottom section, this is typically where you would go when you've gotten an alert, right? There's an issue with a particular launch, and now you want to be able to get ahead of them and figure out exactly what's causing that launch or that failure. And now you can take a look at the date and time of the application here on the left-hand side of the screen, what application was being launched, where the applications were being launched from, and ultimately whether that launch was successful or if it failed. And if it did fail, you can actually not only see the failure, but you can see at what point it failed. This gives you the ability to drill in further and understand what portions of the environment might be contributing to this launch, right? Did it fail at the launch stage, which typically means it might be some sort of issue with brokering, or did it fail at the resource enumeration resource or enumeration stage, which means that it's probably something with the storefront or something with the configuration of the user's credentials. So those sort of things allow you to quickly identify where the problems are and then drill in further. Now, we can even take that a step further. So what you can also see here is if you click on this magnifying glass icon on the left-hand side now, I'm not going to show you here in this environment, but I'll show you a screenshot. If we flip over and we click on the magnifying glass icon there, what you now get are screenshots of each step of the process. So you can see here what's happening at the access level, authentication, the storefront page, all the way up until the error message that actually shows up for the user. So effectively, what UHS was able to do is get an early warning system to get ahead of issues, but also a system that allows them to get out of the business of relying on users to report and take screenshots of issues. They have it right here so that they can, again, get ahead of these issues, solve them quickly, and limit the end user impact altogether. The next thing that they got with a solution like ours is the ability to troubleshoot issues very quickly. Of course, we're talking about an application that's being delivered via Citrix, and of course, you start hearing complaints that Citrix is slow, and you want to be able to drill into the sessions and drill into the users and the infrastructure, understand exactly what's impacting that. Even things like with, my application keeps crashing due to drag, whether it's my power chart application keeps crashing, or they have an issue with printing or things like that. That's when they were able to leverage the portion of the technology that we went over in the first client story, which is the session display. And they went through the same process there of isolating the user sessions, and then once they isolated and identified the session that they're looking for, they're able to click down on the session and drill into, again, everything that went into this user session. And I know we skimmed over some of the rest of the tabs here, so I'll focus a little bit on this tab, which is the summary tab. And the summary tab, what it does is it takes relevant information from each of these other tabs here at the top of the screen and presents it here in a way that allows you to come up with quick answers as to what's causing slowness, so you can quickly sort of escalate or have those collaborative conversations, whether it's with end users or with other members of your team. So if you look here at the top of the screen, you can see a high-level breakdown of all of the components involved in this user session, a breakdown of the logon process as we sort of went through in the last tab. But I'll focus here on key performance metrics, because this allows you to understand the performance of the user inside of their session. So for instance, let's say this user called in complaining that their session was slow. And a lot of times, of course, with COVID, there's a lot more users that are working remotely, of course. And in UHS's case, they're able to identify or able to take a look at this user session over time. You can see that they're having a pretty good session up until this point right here, where there's about a 6-second delay in their session. And they want to understand why. Is it a resource problem, or is it a network problem? Is it something from the application side with Cerner, or is it something impacted by the network and the available network connection that they have to access the application? They're able to identify that quickly by looking here at network latency. So here you can see that at the time that there's a round trip time spike, so a user issue, user experience issue, there's also a spike in network latency. So this tells UHS that this issue that happened here at this particular time period is not due to an issue with Cerner or their application. This is something that has to do with the user's ability to access the environment, specifically with the network configuration. Now moving forward, you can actually see that correlates here with a major drop in connection speed. And this is, when we say connection speed, this is basically wherever this user is connecting in, whether it's their home office, whether it's a specific hospital location, this is the amount of bandwidth available at that location to access the environment. So effectively their download speed at their location, which is a very heavy contributing factor to the ability to have a good session. So in this case, they're able to quickly say if this user is having a problem due to poor connection speed at their location. And this actually reminds me of one of their use cases where they had users, a bunch of users in the Nevada region, complaining about slowness in their environment. And what they're able to do is leverage this tool to pull up all of their sessions, and they found out that it wasn't an issue with Cerner or their sort of internal connection or anything like that. It was actually due to the fact that there was a issue at those hospital locations that was actually causing a problem. Turns out that they had a riverbed device that was poorly configured, and that actually sort of halved the connection speed at those locations. And they were able to use this view, use the technology to identify the drops in connection speed and figure out exactly at what point this issue started to take place. So you can really start to see having this technology and having this data, they were able to use that to troubleshoot issues very quickly. The last thing that I wanted to talk about with the UHS and their use case was the ability for them to find out what was causing issues with dragging dictation crashing. And as we mentioned before, these tabs break down the different sections, of the user session. So here's more details on the connection, more details on the performance of that Cerner, RHOs, and app server. But I'm going to focus here on the alerts and logs section. Here's where you would see any application or system error or warning events that are taking place on the machines that are hosting sessions or hosting the Cerner sessions. And in this case, this is where they're able to find it every time a user had a PowerChart session and PowerChart would crash. It wasn't due to an issue with PowerChart. It was actually due to the fact that dragging dictation was crashing. And they were able to see some application crash events for dragging dictation here in the event log section. And that was actually the root cause of the slowness. This was the objective information that they used to collaborate with Nuance and any other team members to be able to solve those problems. Without this, there was a lot of finger pointing because, you have Cerner, you have the Windows team or the sort of infrastructure team, you have the Cerner application team, and you have the Citrix team all finger pointing and saying, it's not our problem, it's not yours. And without this information, that would have continued. So that's another use case. Another reason why having this objective data, not only in real time, but historically, is a very effective criteria for being able to identify and troubleshoot issues very quickly. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy and we can talk about the next client story.
Great, thank you, Yemi. So our next story really comes around the measurement piece of everything that we just spoke about. And so this was a healthcare system. They also happened to be using Cerner. And one of the challenges that they were facing is similar to our first. Log-on times were extremely long. And so they had an initiative to really improve performance, specifically focused on that log-on experience. And they had specific goals where they needed to keep log-ons under 30 seconds and reconnects under 10. And so not only did they have to hit these metrics with the improvement project, but then they needed to provide objective evidence to management that they were maintaining these levels of support over time. And they needed to provide that on a weekly, monthly, and over a year time frame. Yemi, can you talk through some of the reports that they were able to leverage to ensure that they were hitting these marks? And if they did find any issues, they were able to address them before having any major impacts across their goals?
Absolutely. And if we take a look here, I have some screenshots of some of the ways that they were able to leverage the data and the technology to accomplish their goals. So the first way is, when you're trying to identify ways to improve the environment, one way to have reporting and trend analysis of the actual performance, and that's where they leverage this report, which is the logon duration report, where it breaks down the different sections of the logons. As you saw in our technology, we have a lot of detail within the logon process, and they leveraged that in this report and shared this to be able to identify what portions of the environment, what portions of the logon process do we need to tackle first in order to improve the environment, improve the logon times and get them under about 30 seconds. The next report that we can take a look at, as the next sort of way that they're able to leverage the data, is by enhancing the data. And this is where they leverage some tools like Power BI or because we have views for that specific platform, Tableau, even Excel, to be able to sort of use the data and map out trend lines and show improvement in the environment per location or per application. And here's one of them that shows you sort of the average logon time from a particular delivery group, but then also breaks down the different sections of the process as well. This is one that you can send over that this particular customer is able to send over to management to show, okay, this is what has improved and here's where we need to improve in order to get to our logon goal. Another example of enhancing the data as well is this report, where it breaks down the different stages of the logon process, and it also breaks down the times per application, the session count, which all obviously it's a very contributing factor to logon times, how many users are accessing the environment at a particular time. So having all of this data allowed them to not only continue to reduce the logon times, but to track them and trend them over time to show improvement and what else needs to change. So using the data to have sort of objective conversations about permanent fix actions, whether that is to upgrade their VDI environment, or maybe that means upgrading their or deprecating some legacy hardware. But you can't really make those decisions without having this objective data and having it in a historical perspective. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy and we can wrap up.
Great. And we do have a couple questions that have come in. So if you have any additional questions, please submit them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them in a minute. One question we often get is, how long would it take to deploy something like this? We're able to get health systems up and running in less than 2 hours. We've got white glove implementation services to help with the install. Work with our technical consultant like Yemi, who can get up and running out of the box reports and alerts to have that proactive nature. And then keep in mind, one of the things we talked about early on is the embedded intelligence and automation. And Yemi showed you that in determining what is root cause. Because of that embedded intelligence, you don't have to be an expert to use the system. And in fact, we've got specific help sections throughout the tool that really guides you through specific troubleshooting workflows and allows you to understand how these metrics can be used to resolve end user performance issues. So with that, let me go ahead and get to some of the questions, and please do keep them coming in should you have any. So the first one I have here, Yemi, is could you talk about how you're different from some of the free tools like Citrix Director?
Yeah, of course. That's a really good question. And I think we seem to get that a lot. So we actually have a slide prepared. Let me pull that up. And I think that the major differences between a tool, between Goliath and some of the free tools that are out there is visibility. So if we look here on the screen, and you look in the middle of the screen here, all of the portions that are not green, that are not red, are what a tool like, let's say, Director is going to monitor. And we actually took this graphic directly from Citrix's website. And so Director is going to do a good job of monitoring these components. But as we all know, end user experience is impacted by a lot more than just the Citrix specific components. So the difference here is that Goliath is going to monitor all of these other elements that are here on the screen. So the virtual environment, the remote users, do some application testing, purpose-built EHR applications, as well as those back-end systems and user experience, networks, storage, printers, things like that. So anything that impacts the user experience, Goliath is going to monitor. And the next thing is having historical information, having the ability to trend issues over time, having the ability to go back historically and see what impacted an individual user session, so that you can not only have the end-to-end visibility, but you have the ability to leverage all of that data to put in place permanent fix actions and justify those fix actions in order to eliminate them from happening in the future.
Great, thank you, Yemi. Next question here then is around, are you able to prove if it's someone's home Wi-Fi that's causing a performance issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can flip back over to the technology to show you how, we had a similar example in the, for that universal health services example, but I can flip back over and talk a little bit more about how we're able to identify things like that. So I've isolated a session here. This was a a session from looks like today, and you can see that there, in specifically here on the summary tab, you can see all of those metrics that I mentioned before, breaking down the different components and things like that. But if you look here at the key performance metrics section, this is where you're going to be able to identify exactly what's causing a performance issue inside of the user session. The round trip time is going to tell you if they're having a problem or not. The network latency is going to tell you if that problem is due to a network component or a network issue. And finally here, connection speed. This is the amount of connection that this user has at their location. So basically, if they have a bad Wi-Fi, you'll be able to see that connection speed here and how much of that is available for the Citrix session. So absolutely, we're able to use this metric to tell you whether the user has a good connection at their location or not. And if they don't have a good connection, how much of that is affecting the user session because of the ability to correlate the drops in connection speed to spikes in network latency and round trip time, as we saw in the Universal Health Services example.
All right, Yemi, next question is, if we use a hosted EHR system that's delivered through Citrix and our on-prem VDI is VMware, can you help troubleshoot issues?
Oh, absolutely. That is, I think that's commonly referred to as the double hop configuration, where you have an on-premises virtual environment and then leveraging a tool like or an application like Cerner, which is completely hosted remotely and delivered via Citrix. So there's a Citrix session, and then there's a VDI session, whether that's VMware Horizon or a secondary Citrix session. And in those cases, we have the ability to put technology in Cerner RHO to be able to get that connection, but we're also able to put technology in your data center to give you that full end-to-end visibility on whether it is a VMware Horizon environment, which could get the same types of metrics as we saw in the demonstration today, or a Citrix virtual apps and desktop environment as well. So a lot of our customers actually leverage our technology to troubleshoot double hop configurations, which pretty much means that there's another failure point, right? And without a tool like ours, without the sort of end-to-end visibility, it's really difficult to come up with answers as to what's causing performance issues.
All right, next question is, do you have a view that would let me know anytime if my Citrix infrastructure is up and running correctly or not?
Absolutely. Let me flip over to technology and really showcase that a little bit. So we actually have an automatic discovery and dependency map view. What this means is this will automatically discover all of the components that contribute to Citrix in the environment. It will map them out. It will then add and leverage our embedded intelligence to add over 350 monitoring rules to the environment. These monitoring rules are going to be monitoring for conditions, failure points, thresholds, and events that can actually cause end user experience issues if not taken care of. These monitoring rules then drive a heat map structure here. So as issues start to take place on any one of these components that can cause problems, these components will turn red or orange depending on the severity. And then you can click down on the component. On the right-hand side of the screen, see some end user experience metrics, see some context-specific health checks, and any of the alerts that are driving the color of this particular screen. So now everything here is green, of course, but as you can imagine, as issues start to take place, you can really start to become start to populate with different colors, so that at any point in time in a live updating real-time view, you can see exactly where your problems are coming from. And so you can investigate and solve them as quickly as possible before users are actually impacted. You can also drill down here into the delivery layer, which is going to break down the different portions of the environment. So from a sort of delivery group perspective, you can see all the delivery groups, machine catalogs, gold images, if those are available. And drilling further down, you can actually click down on a delivery group where you can see details on user experience and what components are actually negatively impacting the environment. So in one single view, live updating based on alerts and embedded intelligence, you have the ability to understand exactly what is impacting the user experience so that you can get ahead of them and solve them quickly.
All right, Yemi, we have 2 more questions unless any others come in here. But the next one is, do you integrate with any third-party tools with your data?
Of course, yeah. Another way customers are able to leverage our data is by, the integrations we have. So we do integrate. That's how a number of our customers, especially in healthcare, are able to use our technology. So we do integrate with a lot of tools out there, whether it's ServiceNow or MoveSoft or anything else like that. There are a number of different ways we can integrate, and we do that very often.
All right. And then one other one did come in, so 2 more. Do you have any reports that speak to Citrix user activity, especially remote working?
Sure, absolutely. Let me pull one up here. I think this might be one that's helpful. So, of course, as you can imagine, with users working remotely now, it's important for not only IT to understand, how users are working, but also, how this has sort of affected the users and are the users actually, leveraging the tool. So here I pulled up the Citrix Virtual Apps end user productivity report. And what this report does is it breaks down, as you can see here on the left-hand side, the users, their client IP address, what infrastructure component they use to access the environment, their start times, the session start times, the session end times, or the times that the session state changed. And you can see their duration, the amount of time that they were actually interacting with the environment. So actually creating ICA traffic and not just maybe opening up the VDI and going for a walk or something like that. You can see the amount of time that they're spending interacting with the environment, so you can see their interaction time, their inactivity time conversely. You can see the percentage and then the max inactivity, so the maximum amount of time that they were inactive within their session. And I know this, for the most part, has been used to understand what the user behavior and how users are working now. I know customers have found that some users like to log in early, take a nice long break in the middle of their workday, maybe because they're homeschooling or they have other obligations now that everyone's working from home, and then get back on later in the nighttime and continue their work. So I think our customers have found that users are actually working more. And if a user isn't working, they can use this to understand and then leverage this with some of the data that we have on the user experience to understand, are they not working because their environment's really slow or things like that. So this has been, I know, a very popular report that really helps IT and management understand exactly what the user activity and productivity is with the surge of remote users.
All right, and now this is officially the last question. You mentioned issues with handheld scanners not working. We have that issue with Citrix. How can you help me identify root cause?
That's a good question. So that typically, what we would do is we would take a look at the session display, and we can actually drill down into that now and talk about, the different channels that are available and how we can use that to troubleshoot. So if I head back over to my session display here for this user and head over to the ICA HCX channel tab, here we can see at the top of the screen, you know, our latency metrics, right? So network latency, ICA latency, ICA round trip time. On the right-hand side of the screen, I can see the connection speed and bandwidth for this user session. But if we look particularly at this bottom left-hand chart, this is the ICA channel usage chart. And what this will do is show me for the time frame of the user session, the types and amount of bandwidth being used in this session. Now, this is important because the Citrix protocol is going to break out different bandwidth or behavior types into different bandwidth channels. And what this tells us is, you know, what exactly the user has been doing in their session and how that's impacting the user. So when you talk about things like handheld scanners and things like that, those are typically sent over via USB the USB channel. Now, a lot of our customers then leverage this to understand, you know, what ways that bandwidth is going. So, for instance, if you take one of our Cerner customers, they were able to identify the root cause of scanners not working in their environment because they saw that there was bandwidth going from the Cerner session to the on-premises VDI session, but there wasn't any bandwidth going back into it. So it looked like there was some issue with on-premises client drive redirection. They were able to use this information to identify those sort of things. And you can see here there's printer bandwidth, there's Twain bandwidth, which is very heavily used in healthcare environments for scanners. So having the visibility into the types of bandwidth being used and the direction of the bandwidth, that has typically been very helpful, particularly when it comes to identifying issues with redirection and things like that that impact the user's ability to access or to leverage tools like scanners, smart cards, and other things.
Great, thank you, Yemi. That is the end of questions. If anyone on today's webinar would like to have a free trial of what we showed or have a follow-up conversation, please email techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. We'd be happy to assist you. And finally, there will be a short survey when you close out of the webinar. We greatly appreciate your feedback. So please do take a minute just to answer, I think it's 4 short questions. Again, Yemi, thank you for your time today, and thank you for everyone that joined in. We look forward to talking soon. Bye-bye.